You will spend whatever it is you can bring to the table to avoid spending the rest of your life in prison.
Man, lawyers are expensive. Wait, are you billing me for this? How much are you per minute?
I'll send you a bill.
All right, hey folks, a lot of you guys have asked me the question of, hey John, should I have carry insurance? And it's really a path that I've put off a little bit. I haven't really done the mental work there and checking out all the options. Seems like a good idea, but instead of me just leading you down that path, I'm not an expert at this type stuff, and insurance just kind of makes my eyes roll back in my head as I think about, man, just another piece of insurance. I pay an incredible amount in insurance, whether it's health or life or real estate, and it's kind of like adding one more piece of insurance. I feel like a little part of myself would die. So anyway, I ended up reaching out to a subject matter expert who's going to help us go down this path just a little bit. His name is Andrew Branca, and he is an attorney practicing for around 25 years. He should be near and dear to most of our hearts in the community because he is a shooter, and a pretty good one back in the past. He's not shooting as much, if I understand anymore, but he competed at the master class in IDPA. So pretty great shooter, and his entire practice in law is dealing with self-defense. So he is literally a subject matter expert on this issue and rubbed shoulders. I think he was a mentee of Massad Ayoob as well. So anyway, great dude to know. So Andrew, welcome.
I'm very glad to be here, John. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So anyway, as we're talking about insurance and all the things that could go wrong, what is your first answer of, do I need carry insurance?
Well, I mean, it's like asking if you need any kind of insurance, right? That's not mandated. It's a personal decision people have to make based on their risk tolerance. You know, is it worth the money to pay every month in insurance given the risk? Now, in one sense, the risk of us as individuals being involved in a self-defense event is not that high for most of us if you live in a decent neighborhood. But of course, if it happens, then the risk is suddenly 100%. And the cost associated with these self-defense cases is absolutely staggering. So people need to keep in mind that the moment, for example, that you make someone else aware that you have a gun in an effort to change their behavior, which is what you do when you put your hand on your gun and you tell someone to stay back, right? The moment you've made someone aware that you have a gun in an effort to change their behavior, you've met all the legal elements for aggravated assault. You've put someone in fear of imminent death or grave bodily harm. That was your purpose, right? That's why you made them aware you had the gun. Well, if you're charged with aggravated assault, you face the possibility of being convicted that can easily be 10 to 20 years in prison. So it's a very serious felony. And if it involves a gun, as for many of us in the gun community, it would, that can easily result in a firearms enhancement sentence that could add another 10 or 20 years to the cost of that time. So the penalties are very severe, even for conduct that you may believe was done in lawful self-defense. You can still face a criminal charge and be expected to now defend yourself in court. On an aggravated assault charge, you could expect your lead counsel, your attorney, to require a retainer of $30,000 to $50,000. And that's not to go to trial. That's to get to trial. Wow. If you're actually going to have to go to trial, it could easily be $100,000, $200,000. And if it's a killing charge, if you've actually shot someone in self-defense and they've died, and you're facing a charge of murder or manslaughter, just multiply those numbers by 3 or 4 conservatively. So it can easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to have to defend yourself on a killing charge.
Wow. And that's even if you're completely innocent, completely justifiable, clean shoot, you could still rack up those legal fees?
Absolutely. Because
Awesome.
How is it determined that what you did was actually lawful self-defense? And in many states, it's only determined by a final adjudication by a jury coming back with a not guilty verdict, which is awesome. That's a win, right? If that happens. But guess what? You're still out all that money. So if you've had to, sell your house and sell your business and cash out your retirement fund and cash out your kids' college fund to get together the resources to fund the kind of legal defense you're going to need, even if you get acquitted, you're devastated financially. You've lost everything. And it's not like you're going to try to save pennies on your legal defense. You will spend whatever it is you can bring to the table to avoid spending the rest of your life in prison.
Man, lawyers are expensive. Wait, are you billing me for this? How much are you per minute?
I'll send you a bill.
We need to talk a lot faster like this. So you're going to pick it up like it's on an auction block, right? Very good. That was as fast as I could talk and I didn't really get very fast. So anyway, stupid joke. All right. So is that doomsday-ish talk, or let's say I got in a shootout, defending myself, all was justifiable. I didn't do anything really, really stupid. Let's say that I was innocent. What are some likely courses of action? What would that process look like real quick?
Well, one of the difficulties in the self-defense community is we tend to learn things from anecdotes, from stories, from things we hear in the news or on the internet. And we're human beings. Human beings love to learn from stories. And we'll read about cases in which someone used force in purported self-defense, and they didn't end up getting arrested. They didn't end up getting charged. They didn't end up getting prosecuted. And we think to ourselves, well, that didn't work out so bad for that person. But I can tell you in many of those cases, when I look at the facts, what that person did was not in fact lawful. They broke the rules of use of force law, but they got a lucky break. The cops or the prosecutor decided to use their discretion not to arrest, charge, and prosecute this person. But for much of the community, they hear that story. The guy didn't get prosecuted. They think what he did must therefore have been lawful. That's not necessarily the case at all. He just got a lucky break. But we can't count on those lucky breaks, right? We can't count on a prosecutor using his discretion in a way that's favorable to us, because that's outside of our control. We could run into a very aggressive prosecutor. We could run into a prosecutor who just thinks our case is interesting, has some interesting legal issues he'd like to get sorted out in an actual trial, and that's why he's taking us to court. We could run into a prosecutor who has political ambitions. I see plenty of cases where prosecutions are brought in cases of self-defense where there's literally zero evidence inconsistent with innocence. And keep in mind, to find you guilty, they have to prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's no evidence inconsistent with innocence, and they bring the case to trial anyway for obviously political reasons. So my caution to people is always, don't put yourself in a position where you're vulnerable to that. Put yourself in a position where you're prepared for the best case scenario. After all, many of us carry guns around for personal protection. It's not because we think we're going to be able to talk that rapist out of raping us. It's because we're prepared for the worst case scenario. I think that's what the self-defense insurance puts you in that position as well, because now you're in a position where you can finance that legal defense if you need to.
So insurance may be a good idea for the individual based on two things. One is prove your innocence, keep you out of jail, and two, to help mitigate the astronomical legal fees that will accumulate whether you are guilty or whether you are innocent. It's going to be very expensive, and it could financially ruin you without. Is
right.
that?
And there's another factor here as well that I think many people might not realize, and that is, when prosecutors don't like to bring cases to trial that look like they're going to be hard to win. They like to bring cases to trial that look like they're going to be easy to win. Most prosecutors' offices have conviction rates of trial in excess of 90%, federal level in excess of 95%. Well, that's not just because they're great lawyers, although many of them are. It's because they get to choose the cases they take to trial. It's like if a sports team could choose the teams it was going to play, they'd have a 90% win rate too. So when a prosecutor is looking at your case, it's not just a matter of the law and the facts. It's also a function of, well, what kind of resources can this guy bring to bear that's going to complicate my ability to get a conviction? And I consult on plenty of cases where my typical consultation delivery is a very extensive expert report on the legal issues in the case, and they drop this expert report on the prosecutor's desk, and he's like, holy cow, how many lawyers do you have working on this case?
Right.
That's intimidating.
Sure.
Whereas if they know you don't have resources, they know you only are going to be able to scrape together $30,000 for a legal defense. Well, that's not going to be much of a legal defense. That looks like a much easier case to win. If they know you have several $100,000 in insurance to fund your legal defense, well, you're a pretty well-resourced defendant at that point.
Gotcha. So it's hedging against getting a lawsuit in the first place.
It's a factor in their decision-making of whether or not they want to take you to trial in the first place. You look tougher to win.
Very good. Yeah. So for the common man, insurance, good idea. It's a must-have, a should-have, or you could possibly get by without it. Do you have it?
I do, but first of all, I should disclose up front that I've worked with a number of these insurance companies, so I have relationships with many of them. I used to be on USCCA's legal advisory board. I'm no longer doing that, but I am currently partnered with CCW Safe, and we're working on a few projects together. And as part of that partnership, they provide me with their version of self-defense insurance. So I'm covered by CCW Safe, but it's I don't explicitly pay for it. They just gave it to me.
Fair
as
enough.
part of the partnership. So I just want to put that up on the table. And I've worked with a number of the other groups as well. So all that just in full disclosure.
That's what.
And now I forget. Oh, so should it be absolutely required? I think it's probably a good idea if you can afford it, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing, for one, is to be able to defend yourself in the physical fight. All this legal stuff is very important. I spent my whole career working on it, but nothing's more important than being positioned to win the physical fight. If you don't win the physical fight, everything else is rather less pressing, right?
Sure.
So you have to win that first, which means you have to have expended the resources already to be armed or learn how to defend yourself and be safe with a gun and all that practical stuff to win the physical fight. The next step, in my mind, once you're comfortable where you are there, is know what the legal rules are. Self-defense insurance is not a get-out-of-jail card. It doesn't turn something that wasn't lawful self-defense into lawful self-defense. It's not alchemy. All it does is pay your legal bills. If it turns out that and most people like us who get jammed up on a use of force charge and a conviction, it's not because they acted out of malice. It's because they acted out of ignorance. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean it in a technical sense. They were technically ignorant of where the legal boundary was.
Right.
Or even worse in our community, most subjects, when someone walks into a classroom and you're going to teach them something, they start at basically zero knowledge and you try to get them to 100% of the knowledge the class is supposed to teach. Unfortunately, in our community, when it comes to use of force law, most people aren't at zero. They're at like -20. Right. Because they've learned so much stuff that's wrong, that's not true, that they believe to be true. And then they conduct themselves consistent with that misknowledge, and it turns out their use of force was not lawful self-defense. And if that's the case, self-defense insurance is not going to keep you out of jail.
Great.
It'll just pay your legal bills on the way to jail.
That's very comforting. Great. So what I want to get into is, hey, how much does this all cost? And can you point us in the right direction of what are the key companies and what you would kind of try to push us to? So I'd like to go there and ask that question. But before I get there, what are some kind of examples of anecdotal wisdom that's floating out there through just different narratives that get passed around that you would see, yeah, it looks lawful, but man, if somebody pushed you on that, you would get a pretty big bloody nose from that, or just maybe some myths out there. Can you speak to any of that?
Wow. Well, there's tens of thousands of ways that people screw this process up. And the truth is that self-defense law is not complicated. There's 5 elements to a self-defense claim. That's it. Like there's 4 rules of gun safety. There's only 5 components to a claim of self-defense. It's not hard to know. Unfortunately, if you don't know it, it's not hard to make a mistake. I actually do a weekly show every week where we have a case of the week, where I take a case that's happened where people made poor decisions in self-defense, and they find 100 different ways to do it. Typically, for example, one of the requirements of self-defense is that you were not the aggressor in the fight. You did not start the confrontation. And people often assume that means that means they can't have been the physical aggressor. They can't have thrown the first punch. And that's true. You can't have thrown the first punch. You would lose self-defense. But almost any conduct, even otherwise perfectly lawful conduct that can be reasonably foreseeable leading to a fight, like having an argument with someone over a parking space in a parking lot, if that leads to a fight, that otherwise lawful conduct could qualify as provocation sufficient to strip you of self-defense as a justification for your use of force because you contributed to the fight happening.
Right.
So there's 1,000 examples like that. It's people live in a stand your ground state, which under normal circumstances means there's no legal duty to retreat before you can use force in self-defense. That's about 36 of the states. The large majority of states are stand your ground states. And people think, well, that means I don't have to retreat before I use force in self-defense. That's what it sounds like. But you can still get jammed up by not retreating because what the prosecutor can argue to the jury is not that you had a legal duty to retreat, because you don't, but he can argue to the jury, sure, this defendant had no legal duty to retreat, but he could have, and a reasonable person would have, and therefore his conduct is legally unreasonable, and you should deny him self-defense because conduct in self-defense has to be reasonable. So it's a backdoor way of attacking your failure to safely retreat from the fight, even though you don't explicitly have a legal duty to back away from the fight.
Gotcha.
So every one of those 5 elements has those kinds of vulnerabilities in them. Most of what we teach is we teach people what those 5 elements are. We show them where they are in their state's laws, and then we explain to them the various methods by which people jam themselves up by getting those elements violated and therefore losing self-defense and making themselves an easy target for conviction.
Here, man, I got so much I want to ask you. So here's another on the spot question, but how much faith do you have in our judicial process? I was speaking to a lawyer friend who was helping us out, and he says, man, there's not a lot scarier than being judged by a jury of your peers. And it was under the context of, even if you're innocent, being judged by a jury of your peers, it can be really, really scary, because you can I guess what he was saying is the case is clearly laid out. You truly are innocent, but just because of the way the prosecution spun it and the jury, you could still end up in really, really big trouble. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. If I put you in front of a jury, there's at least a 10% chance you're getting convicted. And I don't care if you're the most innocent client who's ever come into my office.
Really?
Because there's a lot of ways that trials can go sideways. There's decision-making by the prosecution. Maybe you're not dealing with an ethical prosecutor. I hate to say that, but there are unethical prosecutors out there who will, if not just bend the rules, but break the rules, will hide exculpatory evidence, for example, from the defense, will bring charges that have absolutely no merit on the law. But they're just hoping if they bring enough charges, the jury will agree to settle on one of them rather than have to continue deliberating another day. Wow. The judge can make outrageous decisions about what kind of evidence is allowed into the case or not allowed into the case. And those evidentiary decisions, remember, the evidence is what the jury bases their verdict on. So if they don't see a piece of evidence, it doesn't exist for legal purposes.
Right.
So if exculpatory evidence is excluded from the trial, the jury never sees it. If they never see it, they're going to make a decision on other evidence that was admitted into the trial, and that verdict could be a guilty verdict. And when it comes to juries themselves, I mean, most of us know people who've tried to get out of jury duty, right?
Right.
Who do you think that leaves in the jury pool? And there's this phrase we've all heard called jury selection. Well, I can assure you, lawyers don't select your jury. Okay, we don't select a jury. If we selected a jury, we'd win every case. We have a modest ability to deselect individual jurors, but we're largely stuck with the jury pool that community gives to us. And if we get a crappy jury pool, that's where your jury's coming from.
Wow.
So those are all common ways in which cases can go badly sideways. The last thing in the world you want to do is, I caution people about this, because one of the things, the phrases I'd like to share with people is, the moment you get involved in that physical confrontation, you've just incurred two risks you were not incurring a moment before: a greater than zero risk of dying, because you could lose that physical fight. I don't care how good you are, things could go sideways. And a greater than zero risk of going to jail for the rest of your life, because you could be as innocent as driven snow and still be found guilty in a court of law. Yep. You can't get those risks down to zero. Now, we train in self-defense because we try to get the risk in the physical fight as close to zero as possible. Right. I teach people self-defense law because I'm trying to get the risk of losing the legal fight as small as possible. But it's never zero. It could happen. The worst case could happen. And I tell people to think to themselves, under what circumstances, if you did lose the legal fight and you got sentenced to 20 years in prison, under what circumstances on the last day of that 20th year would you be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what, it was still worth it?
Right. I
would still press that trigger again. And there are circumstances that are worth it, right? The life of your wife, the life of your kids, your own life. After that, it gets to be a pretty short list of things I'd be willing to go to jail for 20 years for. Right. So just a cautionary tale. And I have plenty of people that go through my classes or they read my book, and they'll email me afterwards and say, oh, my God, I'm so scared now of the legal process. I've decided not to carry a gun. And that's not what I'm trying to encourage people to do. I carry a gun. I've carried a gun every day of my adult life for personal protection. The important thing is, currently I'm carrying a SIG 320.
Okay. All right. So, keep going. Just wondering.
With an RMR on it. Because I can't see anymore because my eyes are bad.
Sorry, that was an important aside. You know, I had to interrupt you there. I mean, obviously. Sure. All right, keep going.
So I'm certainly not trying to encourage people not to carry guns. I do myself. I think people need to be prepared for self-defense. And if that horrible day comes when you do have to use force against another human being because they've compelled you to do that, you want to be able to win that physical fight. But you don't want to do it in such a way that you've won the physical fight only to spend much of the rest of your life in prison. You want to know what the rules are to make yourself hard to convict. One of our phrases here at Law of Self-Defense is, you carry a gun so you're hard to kill. Know the law so you're hard to convict. That doesn't mean learn some legal tricks. We don't teach tricks. It means know where the legal boundaries are, because once you know where they are, it's not that hard to stay well within them and make yourself look like a hard target for a prosecutor while still being able to effectively defend yourself and your family.
Right. Great. What's this stuff cost? Give me a range, and then we'll talk about what's out there and how I can navigate and figure out what I need to get and what folks tuning in may need to look at for themselves.
This stuff in terms of the self-defense insurance?
Yeah. What am I looking at per month?
So it varies. Typically, every one of these companies offers several levels of plans, usually anywhere from $25 to $50 a month would be a pretty typical range. They're actually quite difficult to compare to each other because every one of these companies offers a different basket of products and services. So they're not really directly comparable. They vary a lot in the things they cover. Like some will cover a trial but not an appeal. Others will cover both. Some of them will cover your bail, others won't. But there are general characteristics I use to describe to people the plans, to at least be able to identify plans I would not encourage people to get.
Okay.
And those general characteristics are, these are characteristics to avoid, okay? Or I could reverse them and say to apply. But any one of these programs that's entirely or largely a reimbursement program, if you're acquitted, is totally useless as far as I'm concerned. Because if they're only going to reimburse you after the fact, that means you still don't have the resources to actually fund your legal defense.
Good point.
It's like somebody saying, well, we'll give you an army after you've won the war. No, you need the army to win the war. You need that money to get acquitted. And there's a huge difference between a $30,000 legal defense and a $300,000 legal defense. So if you're stuck with your own limited resources, and by the way, what's their incentive, this reimbursement type plans? Their incentive is actually for you to get convicted. Because if you get convicted, they don't have to reimburse you.
Wow.
So it's in their interest that you not get acquitted. If you get acquitted, they have to pay you all your legal expenses. I don't know about you, but when I partner with someone, I prefer that our interests be aligned rather than be contradictory to each other.
Yeah.
So you want a plan that will definitely pay your legal expenses as they're incurred throughout the course of the process. The other characteristic that people need to be sensitive to is any plan that does not allow you to choose your own lawyer is one that should be avoided. If they tell you, well, we have an affiliate network of lawyers and we'll provide you with the lawyer of our choosing. No. Would you let someone pick your spouse for you? Don't let someone pick your lawyer for you. That's insane. And because your life is in this lawyer's hands, right? If they don't do a good job, you get convicted, you go to jail for much of the rest of your life. So you need confidence in this guy or girl. Plus, there's somebody you're likely to be living with for a year, 2 years, maybe. If it's a killing trial, it can easily take 12 to 24 months. So you need to have confidence in this person that they're fully committed to your case every single day of that period, and they're not just going through the motions. And I'm sad to say there are a lot of criminal defense attorneys out there who go through the motions. I mean, they're not really committed to those cases. They take your retainer, they crank the handle, they do the minimal amount of work they have to do. And if you get convicted, they're not going to prison, right? You're going to prison if you get convicted. Right. You get convicted, they don't give you the money back that you paid them. They get to keep that money whether you get convicted or not. Mm-hmm. So you really want to pick an attorney who you have a high degree of confidence in. Plus, what's the incentive of those plans that say they'll provide you with an attorney? To provide you with a $500 an hour attorney or a $100 an hour attorney? It's in their interest for it to be cheaper, right? So, again, that's a conflict of interest in my mind.
Okay.
The last thing to watch out for is plans that don't actually provide an adequate level of resources. So there are some, we call them self-defense insurance plans. Really, it's more like a prepaid legal services plan. But what they do is they establish a network of lawyers, and they tell their lawyers, well, if you get a referral from one of our members, we'll pay you a flat fee to represent that member. And the flat fee is in the range of, say, $50,000. Well, if you're charged with an assault or even an aggravated assault, $50,000 might be enough to get you up to that pretrial hearing where they might decide they're not actually going to take you to trial, so you don't have any more expense. But $50,000 is not enough for a murder trial or manslaughter trial or even an aggravated assault actual trial. So what ends up happening is there's members in these organizations where they might have to shoot somebody, they kill somebody in self-defense. They call up the group. The group says, all right, we'll reach out to our network of lawyers. And all those network of lawyers are saying, well, you're only going to pay me $50,000 to do a murder trial. I'm not doing a murder trial for $50,000. So in effect, you can't get a lawyer under the plan. You still have to go out and get your own lawyer. And of course, they won't pay for the lawyer you picked.
Right.
Because he's not in the network. And they're trying to limit their exposure to that flat fee, $50,000. So it just doesn't work.
Shady business. You can say no to this, but is there any big company or small company that people may stumble upon that you would say, yeah, you may want to steer away?
I prefer to do the reverse.
Okay, and then let's do the reverse. I was just wondering if something was so anathema that you might just throw a stone. But let's go ahead and do what are the big companies out there that we should at least take a look at?
Now, the ones I'll name three that I'm comfortable recommending to people. I don't recommend just one because none of them are perfect. All of them have advantages and disadvantages, and as I said, offer different baskets of products and services. So what would best fit a particular person's needs, I can't know. That person would have to decide. But three companies that I find reputable, that I've worked with, that I am comfortable encouraging people to take a look at would be CCW Safe, who, as I said, I'm partnered with. So people should take that keep that in mind. But they have they're very well resourced. There's several things I like about them. They're very well resourced and they're self-insured. So they have a independent captive insurance company that provides their coverage for people. The reason that's important these days is because of all the political pressure being brought against the Second Amendment and against gun rights. And a lot of insurance companies are being pressured if a self-defense insurance company is not independently insured, not self-insured, if they're dealing with a third-party insurance company, those third-party insurance companies are dumping the self-defense insurance programs. So, for example, the NRA Carry Guard program is insured by an insurance company called Lockton, and Lockton's informed the NRA, we're not covering you anymore. We're not going to partner with you anymore. To this day, I don't know what the NRA plans to do about that. But it's a real problem because now they don't have any underlying insurance for their program unless they've since arranged something else. But whatever else they've arranged, again, they're subject to that next insurance company also being pressured not to partner with the NRA. So the fact that CCW Safe has its own independent captive insurance company means they're not subject to that kind of pressure. They don't have to worry about their own insurance company dumping them because obviously that wouldn't happen.
Roger.
The other thing I really like about them is they have an attorney who's their national trial counsel. That's attorney Don West. He was one of the attorneys in the George Zimmerman trial, and he is fantastic. I think the world of Don West. So any case that would have him advising on is a much more defensible case than if you didn't have him. So, and obviously CCW Safe is the only company that has Don on their staff. So that's a huge plus in my mind as well. So CCW Safe is one. The other is USCCA. Very well financed as well. I'm not sure what their insurance situation is. I know they work with a third-party insurance company, but I don't know if that's under any threat from political pressure. I've consulted on several cases for them, and I love the way they do their work. Now, again, they're not perfect. All these companies have their strengths and weaknesses. But when I consult on a case for USCCA, basically, they call me up. They say, we have a member. He's got a lead counsel. We'd like you to consult on the case. I tell them what my charge is. They overnight me a check, and I start my work. They don't ask me what I'm doing with the money. They don't ask the work product. They don't interfere with the lawyer-client relationship. They just hand checks over. And I love that about them because it lets the lawyers do the lawyer work, and we've had extraordinarily good outcomes on those cases. In fact, every USCC case I've done, we've gotten the charges dismissed.
Wow.
So that's been very beneficial. They also have a major training component that I think CCW Safe may now be developing. But for example, USCCA has a very extensive, almost like an NRA instructor program equivalent, USCCA instructors throughout the nation where people can get certified as instructors. And I've never taken one of those classes, but I've seen the materials and they look pretty good. So if people are interested in instruction as well as insurance, then that might be something that might particularly attract them to USCCA.
Very good.
The third group is the Armed Citizen Legal Defense Network. This is a slightly different structure. They don't have a third-party insurance. Essentially what they do is they take a percentage of their members' fees that they pay to be members and set it aside in a legal defense fund. And then if one of their members gets charged or is facing criminal liability, they're entitled to some fraction of that legal defense fund in order to cover their legal expenses. One of the nice things about the Armed Citizen Legal Defense Network is I believe they're substantially less expensive than some of the other options. And they have a board of directors that's really very prestigious. Tom Givens, if you know Instructor Tom Givens.
Fighting Smarter,
prolific,
great guy, dude, amazing thinker, thought leader in our industry.
Yep. Massad Ayoob is on their board of directors. For people who've ever heard of the Tueller drill, I imagine everyone in the gun community knows the Tueller drill. That was developed by Dennis Tueller, who's on the board of the Armed Citizen Legal Defense Network. The only caveat with them is they reserve the right to review your case and decide if it looks like self-defense to them. So if they decide it doesn't look like self-defense, they reserve the right not to cover your legal expenses, which is not a judgment call either USCCA or CCW Safe makes. I understand why they make it. They don't want someone to become a member and they commit a murder and then expect to get their legal expenses covered. But it is a factor people should take into consideration. But those three, I think, are ones I've always been comfortable encouraging people to at least consider if they're in the market for self-defense insurance.
Got it. Very good. Hey, guys, if you've been listening along, thanks so much. And Andrew, thank you so much for giving us all this amazing information. All the links for the different insurance companies, I'm going to go ahead and put below in the description. What you can count on in the future is I'm going to have Andrew back on, and we're going to review his book in a different YouTube video. So look forward to that. I've been pouring through the book recently, and it's really, really good. So I'll interview him on that. And also I'm going to make another video as I sort through all the different insurance companies out there regarding concealed carry. I'm going to make a determination on what I get, and I'll go ahead and let you guys know what I went with and why. So that's what you guys can look forward to in the future. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. And Andrew, you have places where you're putting out free content as well for folks. Where can we find you other than getting your book?
Right. So for purposes of self-defense insurance, if people are familiar with Recoil Magazine, they just did a very nice article with lots of details on these different policies. So if people are interested in the details, I would encourage them to take a look at that. And they can access that by pointing their browser to lawofselfdefense.com/recoil. I don't have anything to do with Recoil Magazine. That's just a short, easy to remember URL that I set up to redirect people to their site. In terms of free content from us at Law of Self-Defense, we do a weekly show every week where we examine some self-defense case and explore the legal issues. It's totally free. People can access that at lawofselfdefense.com/show. We have a Patreon page where we have lots of free content as well as premium paid content. And we have free samples of all the paid stuff so people can get a sense of what they get if they do become a patron. Gotcha. And if they do become a patron, even at $5 a month, they can get a free copy of that book you just held up, The Law of Self-Defense, 3rd edition, as our thanks to them for becoming a patron. And they can learn more about that at lawofselfdefense.com/Patreon. Very
good. Hey, thanks so much for being with us. Please be very, very gentle when you invoice me for this.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure, John.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Hey, Warrior Poets, train hard, train smart, and get some good insurance and protection, because winning the fight's just seemingly the start of the battle, isn't it? All right, guys. Sir. Take it easy.